the confrontation you avoid. What if the greatest sabotage in your life is not coming from your enemies, your circumstances, or even your past, but from the exact moment you decide to give up? Not the loud kind of giving up that everyone can see, but the quiet one, the one that happens inside your mind when no one is watching. The moment you tell yourself that it is enough, that you tried, that it is time to step back. That moment feels harmless. It feels justified. It even feels wise. But that is where the fracture begins. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you dressed surrender as intelligence? How many times have you convinced yourself that walking away was the mature decision, when in reality, it was the easier one? The human mind has an extraordinary ability to protect itself from discomfort. It does not say you are afraid. It says you are being realistic. It does not say you are quitting. It says you are choosing peace. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to believe your own excuses. This is how a dangerous pattern is born, not through failure, but through repeated permission to avoid what is difficult. You do not wake up one day and become someone who gives up on everything. You become that person through a series of small retreats, moments where you could have stayed, endured, pushed forward, but chose not to. Each one seems insignificant on its own. Together, they redefine you. Marco Aurelio wrote in Meditations Book 2, paragraph 1, that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If that is true, then what happens when your thoughts constantly justify retreat? What happens when your internal voice no longer challenges you, but protects you from effort? You do not just change your decisions, you change your nature. And here is the part most people never confront. Giving up does not only remove you from a situation, it removes you from the person you were in the process of becoming. Every challenge you abandon was shaping something in you. Discipline, strength, faith, endurance. When you walk away, you do not just escape the struggle, you interrupt your own transformation. This is why the damage is invisible at first. Your life continues. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no collapse, no immediate consequence, but something subtle shifts. You trust yourself less. You hesitate more. You begin to doubt whether you can finish what you start. And that doubt becomes a quiet voice that follows you into every new opportunity. Over time, this voice grows stronger. It reminds you of every unfinished path, every abandoned attempt, every moment you stepped back. And without realizing it, you start approaching life differently. Not with determination, but with caution. Not with faith, but with fear of repeating the same pattern. Now pause and face this question without escaping it. Are you truly making conscious decisions, or are you slowly becoming someone who gives up the moment things become uncomfortable? Because if you do not confront this now, it will not stay contained in one area of your life. It will spread into everything. Your goals, your relationships, your purpose, your faith. And what you are about to see next will reveal something even more unsettling. The reasons you think you give up are not the real reasons. There is something deeper controlling your decisions, something you have been taught to believe without ever questioning. The break of illusion, the lie you believed. You were not taught to give up directly. No one sat you down and said, abandon your path when it becomes difficult. What you were taught was far more subtle, far more dangerous. You were taught to justify giving up in ways that feel intelligent, responsible, even admirable. You learned that stepping back can be called self-respect. You learned that avoiding discomfort can be labeled as protecting your peace. You learned that quitting at the right moment can be seen as strategic thinking. And without realizing it, you began to replace endurance with explanation. This is the illusion. Giving up rarely feels like failure when it happens. It feels like clarity. It feels like you finally understood something others did not. It feels like you are making a mature decision. But in many cases, what you are calling clarity is simply relief from pressure. Your mind does not want to suffer. It is designed to protect you from pain, from uncertainty, from effort that feels overwhelming. So it creates narratives that make retreat acceptable. It tells you that this path is no longer aligned with who you are. It tells you that forcing yourself would be unhealthy. It tells you that there will be better opportunities later. And you believe it, not because it is true, but because it is comforting. Epictetus warned about this in Enchiridion paragraph 10, when he explained that people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the opinions they form about them. When difficulty appears, you do not react to the difficulty. You react to the story you tell yourself about it. And if that story is built on avoidance, you will always find a reason to step back. The most dangerous part is that this illusion becomes your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who knows when to walk away, someone who refuses to tolerate unnecessary struggle. But there is a difference between wisdom and disguised fear, and most people never learn to distinguish one from the other. Fear rarely introduces itself honestly. It does not say, "I'm afraid you will fail." It says, "This is not worth your time." It does not say, "You are not ready." It says, "There are better options waiting." It does not say, "You lack discipline." It says, "You deserve something easier." And so, little by little, you start abandoning things that required you to grow. This is where faith begins to weaken, not in one dramatic moment, but in these small internal negotiations. Because faith demands endurance. Faith requires you to continue even when you do not see immediate results, even when everything in you wants to stop. If you constantly listen to the voice that seeks comfort, you will slowly lose the ability to stand firm when it matters most. Now consider this carefully. How many times have you called something wisdom, when in reality it was just the desire to escape discomfort? How many opportunities have you left behind, not because they were wrong for you, but because they demanded more from you than you were willing to give? The illusion is powerful because it protects your ego. It allows you to walk away without feeling weak, but it comes at a cost. Every time you accept that illusion, you reinforce a pattern that will follow you into every future decision. And what you are about to understand next will take this even deeper, because giving up is not just a series of isolated moments. It is a structure that your mind is building, one decision at a time, shaping the way you respond to life itself. The central revelation, the invisible pattern. You think you give up because of the situation, because it became too hard, too uncertain, too exhausting. But that is not the truth. The situation is only the trigger. The real cause is a pattern that has been forming inside you for far longer than you realize. Giving up is not a single act. It is a system, a mental pathway that becomes stronger every time you choose retreat over resistance. The first time you step back, it feels like an exception. The second time, it feels more familiar. By the third, it starts to feel natural, and eventually, it becomes automatic. This is how the mind works. What you repeat, you reinforce. What you reinforce, you become. In psychology, this is known as conditioning. Your brain learns through repetition. It does not judge whether a decision is right or wrong. It only registers what you do consistently. If your response to difficulty is withdrawal, your brain begins to associate discomfort with escape. It builds a shortcut, a faster way to reach relief. And once that shortcut is established, every new challenge activates the same response. You begin to anticipate failure before it even happens. You start to feel tired before you truly begin. You look at obstacles not as tests to overcome, but as signals to stop. And this shift is so subtle that you rarely notice it happening. What you call lack of motivation is often the result of this pattern. What you call losing interest is often your mind protecting you from effort it has been trained to avoid. Seneca warned about this in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 13, when he spoke about how repeated indulgence in weakness makes the soul fragile. He understood that the more you allow yourself to avoid difficulty, the less capable you become of facing it. And here is where it becomes even more serious. This pattern does not stay confined to one area of your life. It spreads. It moves from your goals into your relationships, from your work into your faith, from your external actions into your internal beliefs. You stop trusting your ability to endure. You begin to doubt whether you can handle pressure. You hesitate before committing to anything that requires long-term effort. And slowly you build a life shaped not by what you desire, but by what you are willing to tolerate. This is why some people never reach their potential. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they have trained themselves over time to escape the very process that would have transformed them. Now understand this clearly. Every time you give up, you are not just ending an attempt. You are strengthening a pattern that will influence your next decision, and the next, and the next, until one day it is no longer a choice. It is who you are. And if that does not concern you, it should. Because what you are building right now is not just a habit. It is a direction, a trajectory that is silently shaping your future. But this is where the weight of it all becomes even greater, because this pattern is not only psychological, it is spiritual, and what is at stake is far more than success or failure. The transition. What is at stake? Every time you give up, you think you are leaving behind a task, a plan, a moment that simply did not work. But that is not what is really happening. You are walking away from something far more significant, something you cannot see, but that was already in motion. You are walking away from the version of yourself that was being formed in that exact struggle. There is a reason why the hardest paths shape the strongest people. It is not because difficulty has value on its own, but because of what it produces within you. Discipline is not built in comfort. Faith is not strengthened in certainty. Endurance is not developed when everything aligns with your expectations. These qualities are forged in resistance, in tension, in moments where continuing feels heavier than stopping. And every time you decide to give up, you interrupt that process. The scriptures make this clear in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, where it teaches that trials produce perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may become complete and lacking nothing. Notice the precision of this idea. Perseverance must finish its work. If you abandon the process too early, the transformation remains incomplete. This is not just about missing an opportunity. It is about interrupting a divine process that was shaping your character. What you call an obstacle is often a tool. What you call resistance is often preparation. But if you step away too soon, you never see what it was meant to produce. And over time, this creates a deeper consequence. It weakens your faith. Because faith is not only believing when things are easy. Faith is continuing when there is no visible result. Faith is staying when your emotions are telling you to leave. It is holding your position when everything in you is searching for an exit. When you repeatedly choose to give up, you begin to associate difficulty with abandonment. You start to believe, even if unconsciously, that when things get hard, the correct response is to withdraw. And that belief slowly distances you from the very essence of faith. You no longer endure long enough to see fulfillment. You no longer trust that something greater is unfolding beyond what you can currently perceive. This is where many lives quietly diverge. Not in moments of clarity, but in moments of pressure. One person stays, another steps back, and that single difference, repeated over time, creates entirely different destinies. Now ask yourself something that demands honesty. How many times have you left a process before it could complete what it started in you? How many times have you walked away, not because it was wrong, but because it became uncomfortable? Because what you are about to see next will expose the first layer of how this pattern is already shaping your identity, altering the way you see yourself, even if you have never put it into words. Reason 1, it silently destroys your identity. Every time you give up, something inside you shifts, and not in a way you can immediately see. It is not your circumstances that change first. It is your identity. Identity is not built in the moments when everything is easy. It is built in the moments when you decide whether you continue or retreat. Each decision becomes a message you send to yourself about who you are. When you persist, even when it is uncomfortable, you reinforce a simple but powerful truth. You are someone who endures. You are someone who does not break under pressure. You are someone who finishes what you start. But when you give up, even for reasons that seem justified, you send a different message. You tell yourself that you are someone who stops when it becomes difficult, someone who withdraws when the path demands more, someone who does not stay long enough to see things through. At first, this message is weak. It feels like an isolated moment. But the mind remembers. It stores these decisions and begins to build a self-image around them. This is why people who give up repeatedly start to speak differently about themselves. They say things like, "I always lose motivation. I never finish what I start. This is not just language. It is identity being formed. James Clear explains this principle when he says that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. If your repeated action is giving up, then you are consistently voting for an identity built on retreat. And once that identity is established, your future decisions begin to align with it automatically. You hesitate before committing to something meaningful. You doubt your ability before you even begin. You look at challenges and feel a quiet resistance, not because the challenge is impossible, but because your identity no longer supports endurance. This is where it becomes dangerous, because you are no longer just facing external obstacles. You are facing yourself. Proverbs chapter 23 verse 7 teaches that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If your internal belief becomes that you are someone who gives up, your actions will follow that belief, even when opportunities are within your reach. You will sabotage yourself without realizing it. You will step back before you fail, just to avoid confirming what you already fear about yourself. And this creates a cycle that is difficult to break. You give up, which weakens your identity. A weaker identity leads to more hesitation. That hesitation leads to more giving up. And with each repetition, the pattern becomes stronger. Now consider this carefully. The problem is not only that you are giving up on things. The problem is that you are becoming someone who gives up. And if that continues, it will not matter how many opportunities appear in your life. You will not be able to hold on to them long enough to see what they could become. But this is only the first layer of the damage, because what happens next is even more subtle. It does not just affect how you see yourself. It begins to erode something even more fragile: your confidence. Reason 2. It erodes your confidence without you noticing. Confidence is not built by thinking positively about yourself. It is built by evidence, by proof, by moments where you face something difficult and remain standing. Every time you endure, even when it is uncomfortable, you create a reference inside your mind. A memory that says, I stayed, I handled it, I did not run. And these references accumulate. They form the foundation of real confidence, the kind that does not depend on motivation or external validation. But when you give up, you interrupt that process. You remove the possibility of creating that internal proof. You leave the situation before your mind can register that you were capable of handling it. And without that evidence, your confidence has nothing to stand on. This is why people who give up frequently start to feel uncertain, even in situations they could handle. It is not because they lack ability. It is because they lack proof of their own endurance. Over time, this creates a subtle but powerful shift. You begin to question yourself more. You hesitate before taking action. You feel a quiet insecurity that you cannot fully explain. You start asking yourself, what if I cannot do this? What if I fail again? What if I stop halfway like before? And these questions do not come from nowhere. They come from your own history. Seneca warned about this in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 28, when he explained that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But what feeds that imagination? Past experiences. Repeated moments where you did not stay long enough to prove to yourself that you could endure. Each time you give up, you strengthen doubt. You make it easier for your mind to anticipate failure, even before anything has truly begun. And the most dangerous part is that this erosion is silent. You do not wake up one day and realize your confidence is gone. It fades gradually, like something being drained from within you. You still move forward, but with less certainty. You still try, but with hesitation. You still hope, but without conviction. And eventually, you begin to avoid situations that would challenge you, not because you are incapable, but because you no longer trust yourself to stay. This is how potential is lost. Not through lack of talent, but through lack of sustained belief in your own ability to persist. Now reflect on this with honesty. How many times have you doubted yourself, not because you were unprepared, but because you remembered a moment when you gave up? Because what comes next will reveal something even deeper. It is not only your identity and your confidence that are being affected. Your mind itself is changing, adapting to a pattern that will make future resistance even harder. Reason 3. It reprograms your mind to avoid effort. Your mind is not neutral, it is adaptive. It learns from what you repeat, and then it begins to shape your future responses based on that repetition. Every time you give up, your brain records something very specific. It associates discomfort with escape. It registers that when things become difficult, the fastest way to relief is to stop. At first, this seems harmless. It feels like you are simply choosing rest. But what you are actually doing is training your mind to avoid effort. Neuroscience explains that the brain is constantly optimizing for efficiency. It looks for patterns that reduce pain and conserve energy. When you repeatedly choose to give up, your brain strengthens the pathway that leads to avoidance. It makes that response faster, more automatic, more instinctive. This is why, over time, you begin to feel resistance much earlier than before. You sit down to work and your mind already feels tired. You face a challenge, and your body reacts as if it is heavier than it actually is. You begin something new, and almost immediately, you feel the urge to stop. This is not laziness. This is conditioning. Your brain has learned that effort leads to discomfort, and discomfort leads to escape. So it tries to skip the process entirely. This is what makes the habit of giving up so dangerous. It does not just affect your decisions. It rewires your perception of effort itself. Things that once felt manageable begin to feel overwhelming. Tasks that require focus start to feel exhausting before you even begin. You lose the natural tolerance for discomfort that is necessary for growth. And once that tolerance decreases, everything becomes harder. Cal Newport speaks about this in his work on deep focus, explaining that the ability to concentrate and endure cognitive effort is like a muscle. If you do not use it, it weakens. If you constantly avoid strain, your capacity to handle it diminishes. The same principle applies here. Every time you escape effort, you reduce your ability to face it in the future. And this creates a cycle that traps you. You avoid effort, which makes effort feel harder. Because it feels harder, you avoid it again. And with each repetition, your threshold for discomfort becomes lower. Eventually, even small challenges begin to feel like burdens. Now consider the consequence of this. If your mind is trained to avoid effort, how will you handle anything that requires persistence? How will you build something meaningful, something lasting, something that demands time and resistance? The answer is simple. You will not. Not because you are incapable, but because your mind has been trained to reject the very process required to achieve it. This is why discipline is not just a trait. It is a trained response. It is the result of repeatedly choosing to stay when everything in you wants to leave. And when you reverse that pattern, when you repeatedly choose to leave, you train yourself in the opposite direction. Now ask yourself something direct. Are you avoiding effort because it is too hard? Or has it become too hard because you have been avoiding it? Because what comes next will show you that this pattern does not stay inside your mind. It begins to shape your reality in ways you do not immediately recognize. Reason 4. Small quitting creates great failure. You do not fail in one moment. You fail in accumulation. Most people are waiting for a dramatic collapse to explain why their life did not move forward. They imagine failure as something visible, something sudden, something undeniable. But real failure is built quietly, through small decisions that seem insignificant when they happen. Every time you give up on something small, you tell yourself it does not matter. It is just one task, one attempt, one day, one opportunity. You convince yourself that you can recover later, that you can start again when you feel ready. But what you are not seeing is the pattern forming beneath those moments. Failure is not the result of one big mistake. It is the result of many small retreats that, over time, remove you from the path entirely. Jesus makes this principle clear in Luke chapter 16, verse 10, when he teaches that whoever is faithful in little is also faithful in much. The reverse is also true. If you are not faithful in small things, you will not suddenly become consistent when something greater appears. The habits you practice in small moments define how you respond in significant ones. If you cannot stay focused when the pressure is low, you will not endure when the pressure is high. If you walk away from minor discomfort, you will not stand firm in major trials. This is why small quitting is so dangerous. It feels harmless, but it builds a foundation that cannot support anything meaningful. Over time, this begins to affect your results. Projects remain unfinished, goals stay incomplete, ideas never fully develop, not because they were impossible, but because they were abandoned before they had the chance to grow. And the most frustrating part is that from the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. No major failure, no clear collapse, just a life that does not progress the way it should. This creates confusion. You begin to wonder why others are moving forward while you feel stuck. You question your abilities. You question your direction. But the answer is not in your potential. It is in your consistency. Small quitting removes momentum. And without momentum, even the strongest intentions lose their power. Think about this carefully. How many things in your life did not fail because they were wrong, but because you did not stay long enough to make them work? Because what comes next goes even deeper. It is not just that you stop progressing. You begin to lower your own standards without realizing it. Reason 5. You start accepting less than you deserve. At the beginning, you notice it. You feel that something is off. You know that what you are accepting is not what you once desired. But over time, that awareness fades. This is what repeated giving up does. It does not just stop you from reaching higher. It slowly lowers what you believe you are worthy of. Every time you walk away from something that required more of you, you adjust your internal standard. You begin to tell yourself, without saying it directly, that this is enough, that you should not expect too much, that it is better to stay within what feels safe, predictable, manageable. And this is how people settle. Not because they consciously choose a smaller life, but because they have trained themselves to avoid the effort required for a greater one. You stop aiming for what challenges you and start choosing what accommodates your current level of comfort. You stop pursuing what demands growth and start accepting what requires little resistance. This shift is subtle, but it is decisive. Proverbs chapter 13 verse 4 teaches that the soul of the diligent is richly supplied, while the one who is idle desires and has nothing. Notice the contrast. It is not about desire. Both people desire. The difference is in what they are willing to endure. When you give up repeatedly, your desires remain, but your willingness to pursue them weakens. And eventually, you begin to align your expectations with your current level of effort. You convince yourself that you do not need more, that you are fine where you are, that striving for something greater is unnecessary. But deep down, there is a tension, because a part of you knows that you are capable of more. A part of you recognizes that you have settled below your potential, and that tension does not disappear. It becomes a quiet dissatisfaction that follows you. You look at opportunities and feel a distance, not because they are out of reach, but because they no longer match the standards you have allowed yourself to adopt. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because once you accept less, you begin to build a life around that level. Your decisions, your environment, your relationships, everything starts to reflect what you have normalized. You no longer feel challenged. You no longer feel stretched. But you also no longer feel fulfilled. Now ask yourself something direct. Have you lowered your expectations because life limited you, or because you stopped demanding more from yourself? Because what comes next reveals another consequence that most people never notice until it is too late. It is not just that you accept less. It is that opportunities begin to pass in front of you, and you no longer recognize them for what they are. Reason 6. Opportunities pass without you noticing. Opportunities rarely arrive as something obvious, clear, and perfectly aligned. Most of the time, they come disguised as effort, uncertainty, and responsibility. And this is exactly why people who develop the habit of giving up stop recognizing them. When your mind is trained to avoid difficulty, you no longer evaluate opportunities based on their potential. You evaluate them based on how uncomfortable they will be. If it demands too much focus, you hesitate. If it requires persistence, you delay. If it involves risk, you step back. Not because the opportunity is wrong, but because it does not match the version of you that has been conditioned to avoid resistance. This is how doors begin to close without you realizing they were ever open. At first, it seems like nothing is happening. Life continues normally. But slowly, something shifts. You start seeing fewer chances, fewer moments that could change your direction, fewer possibilities that excite you. It is not that opportunities disappeared. It is that your perception changed. Jesus makes this principle clear in Matthew chapter 25, verses 28 through 29, when he teaches that to the one who has, more will be given, but from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. This is not only about material things. It is about responsibility, awareness, and readiness. When you prove that you cannot carry what is given to you, life stops placing greater things in your hands. And this is where many people become confused. They believe they are unlucky. They believe that others are simply more fortunate. They believe that life has not given them the same chances. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Opportunities require a certain level of readiness. They require someone who is willing to endure the process that comes with them. If your pattern is to give up when things become demanding, you will unconsciously reject the very opportunities that could elevate you. You will look at them and feel resistance instead of excitement. You will find reasons to delay instead of reasons to act. And in many cases, you will not even realize what you are turning away from. This is why some people remain in the same place for years, while others move forward with what seems like the same starting point. It is not about who had the better opportunity. It is about who stayed long enough to recognize it, accept it, and endure what it required. Now reflect on this carefully. How many opportunities have passed through your life? Not because they were not there, but because you were not ready to sustain the effort they demanded. Because what comes next goes beyond opportunities and results. It reaches something deeper. It begins to affect your connection with purpose itself. Reason 7. It separates you from your purpose. There is a difference between being busy and being aligned. You can be constantly doing things, constantly moving, constantly starting new paths, and still be completely disconnected from your purpose. The habit of giving up slowly creates this separation. Every time you abandon something meaningful, you do not just lose progress, you lose alignment. Because purpose is not revealed in moments of comfort. It is revealed through sustained obedience to what you are called to endure. But when you repeatedly step away from what demands consistency, you begin to drift. Not all at once, but gradually. You stop staying in processes long enough for them to reveal their deeper meaning. You interrupt growth before it matures into clarity. And over time, confusion replaces direction. You start questioning what you are supposed to do with your life. You try different things, switch paths, restart projects, hoping that something will finally feel right. But the real issue is not lack of direction. It is lack of endurance in one direction long enough to see it unfold. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 21, it is written that many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. This reveals something important. Purpose is not discovered through constant change, but through alignment and persistence in what has been placed before you. When you give up too quickly, you break that alignment. You step out of processes that were meant to shape you, and as a result, you never fully understand what they were building in you. This is why many people feel spiritually stuck, not because they are doing nothing, but because they are never staying long enough in anything to allow transformation to take place. Purpose requires patience. It requires endurance through seasons that do not immediately make sense. It requires trust in what is not yet visible. But the habit of giving up trains you to expect instant clarity. If something does not feel right quickly, you leave. If results do not appear fast enough, you move on. If discomfort increases, you assume it is not meant for you. And slowly, you begin to disconnect from deeper meaning. You start living reactively instead of intentionally. You follow what feels easier instead of what feels aligned. And without realizing it, your life becomes a collection of incomplete paths instead of a fulfilled direction. Now consider this seriously. Is your life lacking purpose, or is your endurance preventing purpose from fully revealing itself to you? Because what comes next is even more confronting. It is not only about purpose being distant, it is about something inside you beginning to weaken in ways you can no longer ignore. Reason 8. It weakens your faith in yourself and in God. There is a point where the real damage of giving up is no longer external. It is internal. It is no longer about what you lose outside of you, but what begins to fade within you. Faith is built through experience, not theory, not intention. Experience. It is formed when you continue even without guarantees, when you stay even without immediate results, when you trust even when nothing is visible yet. But every time you give up, something subtle happens. You interrupt that process of trust. You step out before faith has time to mature. At first, it seems harmless. You simply tell yourself it was not the right time or the right path. But internally, your mind records something deeper. It records that when things become uncertain, you leave. When pressure increases, you withdraw. When outcomes delay, you stop believing enough to continue. And this pattern does not stay isolated. It begins to affect how you see yourself and even how you relate to God. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is described as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This means faith exists precisely in what is not yet visible. It is the ability to remain steady without physical confirmation. But when the habit of giving up grows inside you, that ability weakens. You begin to doubt not only the path, but your own capacity to walk it. You stop trusting your endurance. You stop trusting your consistency. And slowly you begin to doubt whether you are capable of sustaining anything meaningful. This internal doubt is far more destructive than external failure, because failure can be corrected, but a weakened faith in yourself changes the way you approach everything before it even begins. You hesitate more. You commit less. You avoid deeper challenges because part of you no longer believes you can remain when it becomes difficult. And spiritually, something similar happens. You begin to question whether things will ever change. You pray, but without expectation. You move forward, but without conviction. You hope, but with hesitation. It is not that faith disappears completely. It becomes inconsistent, conditional, dependent on visible results. And this is where many people get stuck for years, not because they do not believe at all, but because they no longer believe enough to endure what faith requires. Now reflect honestly. How many times have you stopped believing in a process, not because it was wrong, but because you could no longer tolerate the waiting? Because what comes next reveals something even more serious. It is not just that faith weakens, it is that your entire perception of struggle begins to change. And that changes everything about how you live. Reason 9. It transforms your struggles into defeats. Struggle is not supposed to define you. It is supposed to develop you. But when the habit of giving up takes root, something dangerous happens inside your perception. You stop seeing struggle as a process and start seeing it as proof of failure. This is a silent shift, but it changes everything. When you are mentally conditioned to endure, struggle feels temporary. It feels like a phase, something you pass through. But when you are conditioned to give up, struggle starts to feel like a sign that you are not capable. The same situation, but a completely different meaning. This is how people begin to internalize defeat long before anything is truly over. They are not defeated by the challenge itself, but by the interpretation of the challenge. And that interpretation is shaped by past decisions to quit. Each time you give up, your mind stores a reference. It begins to associate difficulty not with growth, but with failure. So when a similar situation appears again, your perception is already biased. You do not enter it with curiosity or strength. You enter it with expectation of collapse. And this expectation becomes self-fulfilling. In Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 4, it is written that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. Notice the progression. Struggle is not meant to end you. It is meant to build layers within you. But when you interrupt that process by giving up, you break the chain. You stop perseverance from forming. You prevent character from developing. And without character, hope becomes unstable. This is why some people face the same type of struggle repeatedly, but never grow from it. They encounter difficulty, step back, and interpret the experience as proof that they are not meant for it, when in reality they never stayed long enough for transformation to occur. Over time, This creates a distorted identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who is always struggling but never overcoming, always starting but never finishing, always trying but never succeeding. And once that identity forms, it influences every future challenge you face. You stop approaching life as someone who is being shaped. You start approaching it as someone who is being defeated. But here is the truth that most people never realize. Struggle does not determine your identity. Your response to struggle does. Now ask yourself this with complete honesty. Are your struggles actually defeating you, or has your habit of giving up turned them into defeats before they ever had the chance to become growth? Because what comes next will reveal something even more final. It is not just about how you see struggle. It is about how you begin to see yourself in every area of your life. Reason 10. You begin to see yourself as someone who never finishes. There is a moment that most people never notice, but it changes everything. It is the moment you stop expecting yourself to finish things. At first, it is subtle. You start many things with enthusiasm, but somewhere along the way, you already assume how it will end. Not with completion, but with abandonment. Not with victory, but with interruption. This is how identity becomes self-fulfilling. When you give up repeatedly, your mind begins to create a narrative about who you are. Not who you want to be, but who you have proven yourself to be through action. And slowly, that narrative becomes internal truth. You begin to say things like, I am not good at finishing things. I lose motivation easily. I always start strong, but never complete what I begin. These are not just phrases. They are declarations of identity, and once you accept that identity, it starts influencing every decision before you even make it. You hesitate to start important things because part of you already expects failure. You avoid committing fully because you do not trust yourself to stay consistent. You lower your expectations so that disappointment feels less painful. This is how people unconsciously shrink their own lives. In Proverbs chapter 24, verse 10, it is written that if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This is not a condemnation. It is a reflection. It reveals that strength is not measured in intention, but in endurance during difficulty. But when you repeatedly give up, you begin to accept the identity of someone with limited endurance. And that identity becomes a lens through which you see every new challenge. Even opportunities that could transform your life begin to feel unsafe. Not because they are dangerous, but because they require consistency. And this is where something tragic happens. You stop trusting your future self. You no longer believe that you will stay committed long enough to see results. So you stop investing fully in anything that requires time. You begin to live in fragments, partial effort, partial commitment, partial belief, and over time, this becomes normal. Now reflect deeply. Are you truly incapable of finishing what you start, or have you slowly built a self-image that no longer allows you to see yourself as someone who completes anything? Because there is one final consequence of this pattern that most people never confront. It is not just about identity anymore. It becomes the defining direction of your entire life. Reason 11. It defines the direction of your entire life. At a certain point, giving up stops being something you do. It becomes something you are. And when that shift happens, it no longer affects isolated moments of your life. It begins to define the direction of your entire existence. This is the most dangerous stage because it is no longer about individual failures or specific situations. It is about trajectory. The invisible path your life is taking based on repeated decisions that seem small in the moment, but massive over time. Every time you give up, you are not just ending an effort. You are reinforcing a direction away from consistency, away from discipline, away from long-term fulfillment. And without realizing it, you begin to move further from the life you once imagined. At first, the distance is small. You still recognize your potential. You still remember what you wanted. But as the pattern continues, that distance grows. Not because your dreams change, but because your behavior no longer supports them. This is where many people quietly abandon their future without ever announcing it. They do not say, "I will never achieve my goals." They simply stop doing the things that would make those goals possible. And over time, life adjusts. You start choosing paths that require less resistance. You avoid commitments that demand consistency. You prioritize what is easy over what is meaningful. And slowly, your entire lifestyle begins to reflect a lower standard than the one you once envisioned. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, it is written that we should not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. This reveals something essential. The outcome is not disconnected from endurance. It is dependent on it. But when giving up becomes habitual, the harvest never arrives, not because it does not exist, but because the process required to reach it is repeatedly interrupted. And this is where the final truth becomes unavoidable. You are not simply facing a habit. You are facing a direction that becomes harder to reverse the longer it continues. Because every act of quitting makes the next act of perseverance more difficult. Now ask yourself with complete honesty, if nothing changes in this pattern, where will your life be in a few years? Not in theory, but in reality. Because the truth is simple, even if it is uncomfortable. You are either becoming someone who builds, or someone who slowly walks away from everything they start. And what comes next is the moment where everything must be faced directly. No more explanations, no more justifications, only silence and reflection. A moment of silence. The mirror. Stop for a moment and do not rush past this. There is something most people avoid when they reach this point, not because they do not understand, but because understanding becomes uncomfortable when it starts to reflect their own life. Look back, not at your intentions, but at your patterns, not at what you planned, but at what you repeated. How many times did you start something with conviction, only to slowly step away when it demanded persistence? How many decisions felt right in the beginning, but were abandoned the moment they required endurance? How many versions of your future never existed, not because they were impossible, but because you did not stay long enough for them to develop? This is the mirror you rarely allow yourself to face. In Psalms chapter 139, verse 23 through 24, there is a quiet invitation to self-examination. Search me, O God, and know my heart. This is not about judgment. It is about clarity. Because without clarity, patterns repeat themselves without resistance. And here is what most people never admit to themselves. Giving up does not always feel like loss in the moment. It often feels like relief. A weight lifted, a door closed, a chapter ended. But what you do not see is what remains unfinished inside you. Unfinished discipline, unformed character, unfulfilled potential. These do not disappear, they accumulate. And over time, they begin to shape the way you see yourself, the way you approach challenges, and the way you interpret your own capabilities. You stop asking, "Can I overcome this?" and start assuming, "I probably will not stay long enough to see it through." That shift is subtle, but powerful. Now be honest with yourself in a way that does not allow escape. Is your life the result of true limitations, or the result of moments where you left too early? Because what follows next is not about reflection anymore. It is about decision, a point where awareness must turn into action, or it becomes just another thought that fades away. The turning point, the power of one decision. Everything you have heard until now leads to this moment, not information, not reflection, but a decision that only you can make in silence. Because the truth is, your life is not defined by how many times you started, or even how many times you failed. It is defined by the moment you decide to stop giving up on yourself. There is a breaking point where awareness either becomes transformation or becomes just another forgotten insight. And that line is drawn by one thing: your next response to difficulty. Nothing around you needs to change first. The situation does not need to become easier. The path does not need to become clearer. What needs to change is the internal agreement you make when discomfort appears again. This is where most people underestimate themselves. They think change requires motivation, but real change requires a decision that does not depend on emotion. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, there is a powerful declaration: choose this day whom you will serve. Choice is not delayed. It is present. It is immediate. And it is repeated in every moment where resistance appears. Because every time you face something difficult, you are standing again at the same crossroads. Continue or retreat, endure or escape, build or abandon. And what defines you is not the existence of the struggle, but the direction you choose inside it. If you decide to stay, even when it feels uncomfortable, something begins to shift. Not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly. You start rebuilding trust in yourself. You start weakening the pattern of escape. You start proving again and again that you are not controlled by impulse or fear. And this is where transformation begins, not when life becomes easier, but when your response becomes stronger. Now understand this clearly. You do not need a perfect version of yourself to begin changing this pattern. You only need a moment of honesty strong enough to interrupt it. A moment where you decide that quitting will no longer be your automatic response. Because from this point forward, the question is no longer what has happened to you. The question is what you will do the next time life demands endurance from you. And that answer will define everything that follows. The internal commitment. There is a line between hearing something and becoming something. And most people stay on the wrong side of that line for their entire lives. You can listen, understand, agree, even feel emotionally moved, and still remain exactly the same. Because transformation does not happen in awareness alone. It happens in commitment. Not the kind of commitment you announce, the kind you decide in silence when no one is watching you, when no one is demanding anything from you, when quitting feels easiest and continuing feels heavy. This is the real test. After everything you have understood, you are left with a question that cannot be avoided anymore. Not about your past, not about your failures, not about what you should have done differently, but about what you will allow yourself to become from this moment forward. Because every time you face resistance, a decision is being made inside you. Even if you do not speak it out loud, even if you do not consciously notice it, your response is shaping your identity in real time. Will you continue the pattern that weakens you, or will you interrupt it before it defines you completely? In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, there is a powerful statement. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life. This is not just a spiritual instruction. It is a reflection of how every meaningful moment in life works. There is always a choice being made, even in silence. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Nobody else can make that choice for you. No encouragement, no inspiration, no external motivation will replace the moment you decide to stop giving up on what matters. So look inward, not for answers, but for honesty. Are you willing to remain when it becomes difficult? Or will you continue the pattern that has quietly shaped your past until now? Because what comes next is not about what you believe. It is about what you decide to do when belief is not enough. The final word that stays with you. There are moments in life that do not need more explanation. They only need to be remembered. Because in the end, everything you have heard, everything you have reflected on, everything that has confronted you throughout this message leads to a simple truth that cannot be avoided. Your life is not being shaped by what you know. It is being shaped by what you repeatedly choose when things become difficult. No one changes through inspiration alone. Inspiration fades. Emotion passes. Motivation disappears. But decisions made in moments of resistance leave a trace that lasts far longer than the feeling that produced them. This is why the habit of giving up is so powerful. It does not announce itself as destruction. It disguises itself as relief, as logic, as timing, as wisdom. But over time, it quietly rewrites the direction of your life without asking for permission. And yet, within this same truth lies your responsibility. Because if patterns are built through repetition, they can also be broken through repetition. If giving up has been trained, endurance can also be trained. If weakness has been reinforced, strength can also be rebuilt. But nothing changes until something interrupts the cycle. In James chapter 1, verse 12, it is written that blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because after standing the test, that person will receive the crown of life. This is not about immediate results. It is about the value of remaining when everything inside you suggests leaving. So the real question is no longer about what has happened in your life until now. The question is whether you will continue allowing the same response to define everything that comes next. Because at some point, awareness becomes responsibility. And responsibility demands action, not reflection alone. You already understand the pattern. You already see the cost. You already recognize the direction it creates. Now only one thing remains. What will you choose the next time you feel like giving up? Because that moment will not just be another decision. It will be the continuation of your entire life. End.